Hi, I'm Jessica Russo Scherr, and I am an IB visual arts teacher and artist, and I am here to talk to you about your comparative study. Full disclosure, this is not an IB offered thing to you, but this is my experience as an IB visual arts teacher and what has worked really well for my students. So IB Visual Arts is broken up into three components. You have your process portfolio, your exhibition, and your comparative study. This video will focus primarily on the comparative study. So if you're taking standard level, it's 30 points. And if you're taking higher level, it's 42 points. The main difference between standard level and higher level is that higher level will have one extra criteria to deal with. Standard level has 10 to 15 slides to create their presentation, and higher level has 10 to 15 slides as well, plus 3 to 5 slides for criteria F. You have different assessment criteria for each of the components for IB Visual Arts, and they are criteria A, B, C, D, E, and if you're doing higher level, there's criteria F. And if you wait till after criteria F, I have a little bonus on how to build critical analysis. Choosing artists. Who can you choose? So you need to have 3 artworks, and those artworks can be from 2 artists or 3 artists. I do think some of the better comparative studies have 3 artists. The work selected for comparison should come from contrasting context, like local, national, international, or intercultural. Artworks shown in museums or galleries, or they have articles written about them by reputable sources. And that could include street artists. See your teacher if you're unsure if your selection is suitable. Rely on your teacher. You can choose artists from social media. However, you might not have enough written resources by experts that would be helpful. Person should come from contrasting context, like local, national, international, or intercultural, and also different time periods. Choose artists that you really like, that you're really interested in. Choose artists that are both established, but not necessarily like really predictable. Try to choose other artists that are not as well-known, but are still established. Consider pulling from diverse communities and cultures to really represent an alternate perspective. Where do you find artists? Well, it's helpful if you go to museums and you find an artist in a museum or an art gallery. That's always great because then you have that firsthand experience of seeing the artwork in real life. There's these things called books. They are amazing. You might even have like a library in your school, if those still exist. The reason why I think it's good at this stage to look at a book versus doing an internet search is that you can find things accidentally that you may not have planned on. Whereas if you're doing an internet search, you need to know what you're searching for. Whereas you could pull out a big art history book and just start flipping through and get some ideas. There's also brilliant websites. Go to some of the major art museum websites, Google Arts and Culture. Love Google Arts and Culture because you can zoom in really, really close to the artwork, which is going to be really helpful when you start doing criteria A. Do you need to have a theme for your comparative study? No. But is it helpful? Sometimes. If you're choosing a landscape for one artwork, you wouldn't choose a portrait for another artwork. You want to kind of address an idea or a theme to help make it make sense when you get to criteria D, where you're comparing and contrasting. If the artworks are so diverse in subject matter and theme, then it's going to be hard for you to build analysis. Likewise, you don't want to choose artworks that are too similar, that are all portraits, 3/4, holding something. You don't want to have too much of the same. You want to have a little bit of variety in approaches to an idea or a topic or a theme. So in order to understand the criteria, you have to look at the rubric. You have to pay attention to what they call the mark bands and the assessment criteria. There are a lot of ways that you can organize your comparative study. Most people choose to do it by artist. Criteria A, B, C for artist 1, Artist 2, criteria A, B, and C. Criteria artist 3, criteria A, B, and C. And then they do a few slides, 3 slides for criteria D, where they're comparing and contrasting, and then so on. And that's generally what I've seen. That's generally what's the most effective. It doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. So for criteria A, the formal analysis, which is 6 points of your grade, criteria A is where you look at the elements and principles of an artwork. How many slides should criteria A take? Approximately 3 slides, 1 for each of the artists. What are the principles and elements of art? Line, shape, form, color, value, texture, space, perspective. Those are the elements of art, and the principles are how they are used. So the principles are pattern, rhythm, movement, proportion, scale, balance, unity, and emphasis. And you want to think about the principles and elements and how they work together. The artist used line to create balance. The artist used value to illustrate perspective. So think of it as a formula. A plus B equals C. So A is the elements, B is the principle, and C is the end result. Describe how the work is organized, how the composition is made, what media and processes and techniques have been used in each of the artworks. Is this process conventional or innovative in any way? Now, do you have to talk about all of the principles and elements of art? No, you have to talk about the ones that are really important for that artwork, and you have to dive deep into the analysis for each of them. Now, if you're struggling with the principles and elements in art and vocabulary, look online or on my website. I have links to the Museum of Modern Art glossary of art terms, and the Tate Museum has a really good glossary of art terms, and that could be very helpful for you to build your art vocabulary, which will increase your criteria E score. I like to start off my students with writing a formal analysis art critique first, where you describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. And I think this creates a good foundation for what needs to be in a criteria A slide. How you organize your criteria A slide. Please include the artwork that you're analyzing. Crop out different parts when you're talking about it and give examples. Use arrows, lines, call outs, color swatches to help illustrate your points. However, only do that if it helps illustrate your points. If you're pointing random arrows to, like, there's a clock in the painting and you have an arrow to the clock, that does not help the examiner at all. But if you're drawing lines that show the way the composition is organized, that's helpful. For criteria B, that's the function and purpose of the artwork. So this is basically looking at what is the mood, symbolism, and the interpretation of the artwork. How does this relate to the time period it was created? What art movement was it created in? And, like, is there an understanding of, like, the mood and interpretation based on that art movement? It also might come into play in the cultural context. And you know what? Even though we're trying to put these in different criteria boxes, there might be some overlap, and that is okay. A really good comparative study is going to have a lot of overlap between criteria B and criteria C. Keep in mind, the top descriptor says within the cultural context in which they were created. So there is always going to be that overlap between criteria B and criteria C, the cultural significance. So think, does the interpretation change throughout time? Is the symbolism that was created at the time that it was made, is it still relevant today, or is it changed because of different cultural norms? Annotate the images of symbolic images. Think about how the techniques influence the interpretation of the artwork. You can build on your interpretation for criteria B with these questions: the different functions of art, the context, personal, intellectual, social, or physical function of the work. Like, why was this made? Was it commissioned? Was it made for a specific exhibition? Was it made as part of a series? Is it made based on a theme or an idea or a social protest? Is this piece meant to be expressive, political, decorative, to illustrate an historical event that was significant? Is it meant to be instructional? A lot of biblical paintings were made for this purpose. Does the artwork have to tell a story? Is it illustrative and narrative? Is it religious, mythical, historical, portrait, abstract, realistic, and why? Was it originally meant to be a work of art, or it was something else that turned into it, like now that it's an artifact, now we think of it as an artwork? What choices did the artist make that allowed them to communicate effectively through this media? Have the artist made formal statements about the work? This is a great chance for you to cite a quote or information from them that is a citable point of evidence for you. Next, we have criteria C. And I suggest about 3 slides for this, one for each artist. And you should demonstrate an informed understanding of the cultural significance of the selected works. What does that mean? You have to think about, and a lot of students forget this one. This is like super important. The material significance. What is it made of? Does it matter what media was used? It doesn't matter that the artist used oil paint instead of watercolor, or used a found object of a car door versus constructing something to look like a car door. What does the process involve? Is there a reason that the material might be significant? Was the material popular at the time? Was it cheap or accessible? You know, like really important to have lapis lazuli for the ceilings of churches, because it was super expensive at the time. And they thought it was like beautiful. It showed wealth for the church. That's one example. I have a link on my website to material significance. So if you're struggling with this, check out that link. It's also linked down below. Then we come to the conceptual significance. What is the message, meaning, mood, theme of the idea of the work? Is it significant? Obviously, this relates to the function and purpose. We're thinking more about the cultural part now. We're expanding more into that area. Does it belong to a particular art movement? Is the idea of this piece or the art movement it belongs to revolutionary in any way? And now the biggest part of it, and the part that's kind of covered in the title, the cultural significance. When was the piece made? Where was it made? The patronage of the artwork, who paid for it, how and why? The political circumstances when the work was made, religious circumstances, philosophical movements. You may not be able to answer all of these, but there's probably some that you can. Also, what's going on in the artist's life and the world? This is not just all artist biography. This is more about how the artist biography connects to that specific artwork that you chose. Now, a lot of teachers, and understandably so, use the McPhee framework to help them organize this information. And I think that's a good way to start structuring ideas. I do think that there's some parts of the McPhee framework that cover some things that we don't need to cover in this criteria. But I do think it's good to think about the audience's world, like who is looking at that? What experiences of the world does the audience bring when they interpret or appreciate this artwork? What are some of the cultural characteristics of that area or time period? What's happening in that part of the world? And also the artist's world, the personal history and the art history that relate to your interpretation of the artwork. Could these events relate to the subject matter or techniques used in the artwork? How did others deal with this theme in other times and cultures? If you need some further advice, on my website, I have some criteria C examples that can show you how to address some of these questions. Now, it depends on your artwork. You're not going to be able to answer all of these questions for each of the artworks, but the main idea is that you build a deep analytical understanding of the cultural significance. And for criteria D, that's also 6 points. And you want to have about 2 or 3 slides. Demonstrate an effective identification of critical analysis. And you want to connect similarities and differences of your artworks. In order for you to have do a really good job with this, it needs to be analytical. And that is where a lot of students struggle. Use charts and tables and diagrams. Please try to avoid using a Venn diagram. They're hard to read and it's hard to organize your information. And you have very little real estate if we think about each slide as being real estate. Present your comparisons on the different pieces, clearly identifying the links between them, comparing the formal qualities, comparing the function and purpose. Now, not just described and listed, you want to really build your analysis and identify connections or create connections between these artworks. That, I think, is going to be one of your most challenging, and that's the part that I can't help you out with very much. That's going to be you looking at those artworks and you using your brain to make those connections. When it comes down to it, this is your work, and a lot of it is going to be based on research, but a lot of it is going to be based on your ability to analyze and look at art historical works. So as I mentioned before, criteria E covers the design and the presentation and the visual art vocabulary. It helps if you make it look pretty. And I don't mean like flourishes and overly like decorative. I mean clear, concise, organized, so the examiner can understand everything you're saying. Do not put too many images in the background. Also your fonts, like keep it all above 10-point. Captions can be a little smaller. Don't use too many crazy fonts, keep it standard. Also, don't use too small of text. I mean, that is an issue. And I think my students in some of my examples use too small of text. And that's a balance you're going to have to play with, trying to fit in the amount of words that you need in the real estate that you have. Be wary of white text. I have a student in my examples who used white text, and check your grammar. Oh my goodness, check your grammar and spelling. Paying particular attention to the spelling of artist names and subject-specific terminology. Organize things in text boxes. It's helpful for the layout of your slide to think about signposting, which means bolding important art vocabulary word. So if you are talking about how to really draw the examiner's or your teacher's attention that you know those art vocabulary words, bold them, make them clear. They use titles for their slides, so each slide is very clearly understood by the examiner. And criteria F analyzes to what extent their work has been influenced by the art that you examined. And now the moment you've been waiting for, criteria F. Now this is only for higher level candidates, but there's 12 points here, 12 points. I see this so often that so many students do really well on the beginning part. And then they come to criteria F and they kind of throw it together. And what they don't realize, it's 12 points. You have 3 to 5 slides. Use 5 slides to demonstrate analysis and reflection on the outcomes. So you have to create a conclusion. Many students leave this out. You need to create a conclusion from what you've just done. Create that conclusion on the comparative study and then illustrate how it influenced your own development as an artist. Identify connections between one or more of the selected works. Now, sometimes you may be creating these works at the same time as you're doing the comparative study. Some of these may be sort of subconscious things that you're not thinking about at the time, or it may be very conscious and deliberate. Either way, write the connections that you establish. You may be cognizant of them after you created the work, but it doesn't mean that they didn't exist while you were creating them. So these influences and personal connections should be evidenced in both visual, written, and written forms. And you can talk about cultural context, formal qualities, the function and purpose, materials, conceptual and cultural significance. Make sure when you're referring to your own artwork and practices, you must be sure to identify and acknowledge your own artworks with the same rigorous attention to detail as with the images to other sources. The examiner is not necessarily going to know that it's your artwork. This is not the same examiner that has looked at your process portfolio or is the moderator of the exhibition. So please label your work as candidate work or student artwork. Include the size and the media. They're not assessing the quality of your work. They're assessing how you connect it to the comparative study. Citations do not impact the overall slide numbers, so you can have multiple slides with your references, but in-text referencing is required. Every image should be cited at point of use. Every bit of information that is not your analysis needs to be cited from where you got it from. Any other resources you use, cite in text and also in your attached works cited or bibliography. So here's that bonus content. Use critical theories and aesthetic theories. I have a link on my website that shows different aesthetic theories, but they really do help add another layer. An art critic say something, has a gallery said something, is there a news article written about it? Evidence, what evidence inside or outside the artwork supports your interpretation? Don't be like, oh, this painting is creepy. Like, why is it creepy? What did the artist do to make it look creepy? And do you have any other supporting evidence that says why it's creepy? What criteria do I think is important in judging the artwork? For example, Franz Marc had created an effective expressive painting because the hot colors and lively brush marks he used add an overall feeling of energy and excitement he was trying to create. The overall mood of the drawing would be improved if Kathy Kowitz had used strong, dramatic shadows instead of pale tones. Dark tones would develop the feelings of fear and loneliness in this image. So in criteria F, you can certainly talk about how you saw the artist use the principles and elements or what they did and how you would have done it differently or how you did do it differently. Identify some of the similarities throughout the work and what is the result of the artist including them. And that's really helpful for criteria D. Like similarity is fine, where we can say this person had flowers and this person had flowers and that person had flowers in the artwork. But what is the result of each of the artists including them? Do they each have a different result? Did the choices the artists make in each of the artworks result in different outcomes? Now, on my website, I have a lot more resources for the comparative study, process portfolio, and all things art related. Feel free to check them out. On the actual comparative studies page, I have tons of information, a lot of it created by me, some that are taken from other sources, which is cited below, and I'm very grateful for them for all of their information and help in putting together this site. The IB Visual Arts Guide is the place that you go for all of this. Page 49 has the sort of suggested criteria and the breakup of this, so use that as your resource. And special shout out to my students who have let me use their examples and screenshots from their CS. They all scored super well. I'm very grateful to the thousands of you that come visit this site every week, which is quite incredible. And I hope this video helps make your transition into creating and finalizing your comparative study a success. So best of luck to you.